So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to solve a quadratic, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to use 3 different forms to actually solve this quadratic. So the 3 forms that we're going to look at is we're going to look at factorization. We're going to solve via factorization. Then we should get the same solutions, and we will get the same solutions via the quadratic formula. And finally, getting the same solutions again using a graphical mean. So I'll call it graphically. So we're going to use these 3 different methods to solve the equation as above, x squared minus 5x plus 6. And I'm going to start with factorization. So I'm going to write the equation again. X squared take, let's out. X squared take 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. Now, from the work that we've been doing, we know that we're going to end up in 2 brackets, but first we need to focus on, always focus on the multiplication value first and foremost. So we're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply, that is multiply, to end up with a value of 6. Now, the good thing about 6 is there's actually not too many, so I'm just going to go through a couple of factor pairs. Please don't ever forget the easiest one, which is the number itself and the number 1. So 1 and 6, there's a factor pair, because 1 times 6 is 6. Next one I'm going to go to is 2 and 3. Now, there are no other whole numbers that will multiply directly into 6, so we're just going to leave it with those 2 factor pairs. Now, we need to look at these 2 numbers and go, okay, we're getting a positive 6. Now, the only way to multiply to get a positive 6, that's positive 6, do we have a negative times a negative, because hopefully we recognize that a negative times a negative is a positive, or do we have a positive times a positive? That could also give us positive 6. So that's our first kind of idea of what we need to focus on. So the way we determine that is the next value we're going to look at is this 5 here. And I'm not looking at just 5, I'm also looking at the negative part as well. It's polarity. So if I'm looking at negative 5, and I'm looking at the 2 numbers that multiply to get positive 6, well, the only way I can get a negative 5 is if they are both negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at those factor pairs again. So I'm going to say that both the factor pairs are negative 1 and negative 6. Or the answers are negative 2 and negative 3. Now, we know that they both multiply. When we multiply those 2 numbers together, negative 1 and negative 6, we get positive 6. When we multiply negative 2 and negative 3, we get positive 6 as well. But now we need to add the 2 results together. So if I'm going to replace that AND symbol that I've written there, and I'm actually going to replace it with a plus symbol. So plus and plus equals. Right, so I'm going to look at both cases. Negative 1 plus negative 6. Negative 1 plus negative 6 is actually negative 7. Let's have a look at the next line. So that, we can already say, does not work. So we're going to have a look at the next line. Negative 1 plus negative 3. That does actually equal our negative 5. So that's a big tick. So the 2 numbers that we're going to use in our factorization model are negative 2 and negative 3. So I'm just going to write that underneath, and I'm going to stay in the red. Actually, I might go to black. So we're going to go x minus 2 and x minus 3. Now, if you're wondering, does that result in the same result as we had up here, which is if we actually expand our x minus 2 and x minus 3, do we actually get x squared minus 5x plus 6? I strongly suggest you have a look at that, and if you're not quite sure, have a go, maybe even use some technology to see if you are right. But I'm going to tell you x minus 2 times x minus 3 does give you x squared minus 5x plus 6. All right, now we need to use what's called the null factor law. The null factor law. Null factor law simply is anything times 0, anything times 0 will always give you 0, or 0 times anything will give you 0. So all we need to do is look at each individual bracket and how do we make each individual bracket equal to 0. So what value of x do we pop in here to make that bracket equal to 0? Well, x minus 2, what number take 2 gives you 0? There's only one result there. X is equal to 2. Looking at the second bracket, x minus 3, what is the only value you can put and subtract 3 and get 0? Well, that's x is equal to 3. So there are our two solutions. Now, the good thing is, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the quadratic formula. So there you go, there's my solution, there's my other solution. I'm going to use the quadratic formula, and now using the quadratic formula, we should still get exactly the same solution. So let's have a look and see what we actually end up with. So I'm going to write the question out again. We've got x squared minus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. Now, I'm going to write the quadratic formula out, and then I'm going to write the values of a, b, and c. Probably actually the first thing to look at is what is the general form for a quadratic? The general form for a quadratic is ax squared, where a is some number, plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now, when we're looking at the general form, this can be any number, this can be any number, and this can be any number. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on those in a moment. But firstly, I'm going to write down the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is the x values are equal to negative b plus or minus. Now, we'll go through that in a moment. Square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Notice I'm saying all of it's over 2a. All right, next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to figure out what is the value of a according to our original question, what is the value of b, and what is the value of c. Now, a, I'm going to arrow that one, is the number that occurs directly in front of the x squared. There doesn't seem to be a number there, but there is actually a number that we can't see. It is the number 1. So 1. B, what is the number that occurs directly in front of the x? We also need to make sure that we include the symbol in front of it. So if it's a plus, we don't actually include that one because it's already assumed. So B in this case is negative 5. And obviously, as you can imagine, C is that constant at the end. And we're going to keep the symbol, so it's plus 6. So we just write 6. All right. Now, going to my formula. I replace or substitute my variables, A, B, and C, with the values that I've determined. So I'm going to go in black because that's what I did for the solutions. X is equal to negative of negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 6 all over 2 times 1. All right, the negative of negative 5. Hopefully we understand that negative of a negative is a positive, so that's going to end up being plus 5. Plus or minus negative 5 squared, that is negative 5 times negative 5. And as we did in the previous one, negative times a negative, well, that's a positive, 25. Minus 4 times 1, which is 4, times 6 gives us 24, which therefore gives us negative, or take 24. Put the square root over, all over 2 times 1, which in this case is 2. I'm going to go to a new slide, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that last line of working down again so we can see it. Last line of working was x is equal to 5 plus or minus 25 minus 24 all over 2. Now simplifying this part in our brackets, or in our square root I should say, 5 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. Now the square root of 1, nice easy number, that's also 1. 5 plus or minus 1 over 2. Now I'm going to separate those two results and talk about the plus or minus. So I'm going to put them over here and over here. So I'm going to go to the plus first over here. 5 plus 1 over 2. 5 plus 1 is 6. Divided by 2 gives me an answer of 3. So we've got x is equal to 3, because that's, don't forget, that's exactly what we're trying to determine. Now over here I'm going to do the takeaway. 5 minus 1 over 2. 5 minus 1, that's 4, divided by 2, that is also 2. Now, if you go back to where we came from before, you hopefully recognise that that's exactly the same two solutions we came up with before. All right, we've got one more method to go, which is graphically. So let's put a title on this one. Graphically. It's very badly written. Graphically. So once again, write down the formula. X squared, take 5x, plus 6 is equal to 0. What I'm going to do, just so I can draw this, I'm going to say y is equal to x squared minus 5x plus 6. Now I'm going to look at that graphically, and then I'm going to introduce something here. So let me just get a axis up. And here is what it looks like when you actually graph it. That is y is equal to x squared minus 5x plus 6. Now, if you have a look at what is the difference between this equation, which is an equation because it's got equals, and this equation. They've both got the x squared, they've both got a negative 5x, and they've both got a plus 6. The major difference here is this y and 0. So what we're actually saying in this case, to solve the equation, we're saying y is equal to 0. So I'm actually going to introduce a line onto my graph here. So I'm going to introduce the line of y is equal to 0. So I've written that in blue, so I'm going to draw it in blue as well. Here it goes. There. And what we're actually after is when do those two lines intersect? Well, they intersect at this point here and this point here. Now, it is quite hard to see. So if you're wondering how to do this potentially at home, I would strongly suggest using Desmos. Desmos is a fantastic website. You can go onto it. You can do lots of different things mathematical on there, but it's a great graphing calculator. And what you'll actually see is that this value here, funnily enough, is x is equal to 2 and x is equal to 3. And that's actually how we solve them both, using factorization, quadratic formula, and lastly, graphically. I hope this helps.